Welcome, everyone, to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and on this podcast, I take a deep dive into the writing process behind some of the world's best songwriters. By way of background, I am a former English professor. I have a PhD in English language and literature, and I'm a writer myself. So this is a conversation about writing between two writers. My goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers, just as writers, plain and simple. So that's all we focus on. I don't care about tour stories, favorite bands, how bands get their name, favorite foods, anything like that. This is, again, a deep dive into the songwriting process with some of the world's best songwriters. And with that, let's get into today's episode. And today on the pod, it is Sophie Payton, known professionally as Gordi. Her new album, like Plasticine, is out now. If you ever think that you're too busy to do anything, remember Gordi, because she is not only a songwriter, and a damn good one at that, she's also a medical doctor, a physician. Either of those things takes up a lot of your time. How she does both, I'm amazed, very impressed. And really, that practice of medicine had a lot to do, was one of the themes of like Plasticine, not the practice of medicine specifically, but the impact that COVID and quite honestly, death, mortality had on her, being around it so much and telling people that their loved ones were not going to live and being around that. And that's certainly would have an impact on anyone. And that's one of the themes of this album. I remember during COVID, I was talking to a lot of songwriters about the impact that COVID was having on them, but they did not have a frontline view of what was going on. And so that certainly is a big part of this album. We did this interview a few months ago, so I believe, back in May. So I apologize if there are some references that might be a few months old here. But anyway, I enjoyed this conversation a lot. Here is my interview with Gordi. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I really enjoy the new music. And one of the things I'm curious about, and I think reading the bio, I think I have this down, but it sounds like you did the bulk of the writing kind of in two spurts. Is that right?
Yeah, that
Okay.
is correct. Yeah, in kind of like there was two weeks that were 6 months apart, but then there were a couple of like satellite songs out of that process. But yeah, the bulk, what I call the meat and potatoes of the record, were done in those 2 weeks.
So was it difficult? Because I hear that from songwriters. When we talk about the actual, when they write, and one of the things I hear is some of them say they wait until the well is full before they start to write. So there is a period where they deliberately do not write, and then all of a sudden, when they do start to write, just things pour forth. So was it difficult to have that discipline? Did you intentionally avoid writing? Was that difficult to do, I guess?
So yeah, it was an unusual period for me, and I had always found, I started writing songs when I was 13. And for me, I think the water metaphor is best when it comes to songwriting. So I'll continue in that vein. It was like a tap that wouldn't turn off. Like it was just, I wrote 100 songs by the time I was 17. And then it just kept coming. And, it would often come at inopportune moments, where I would mostly I'd be needing to study. And I'd be like, well, there's a song coming. So like, I've got to do that. But that kind of came to a dead stop, that sort of flowing, when the pandemic started. And so because I had, at the start of 2020, I'd completed my junior training in medicine, because I'd finished my medical studies, and then I had quit my job in order to go out on tour, and I had a whole year of touring lined up, and I was going to promote this second record called Our Two Skins, which came out in 2020. And of course, we know what happened. The world came to a grinding halt in March, like a month after I'd quit my job. And so instead of going on tour, I spent the better part of the next 2 years working in hospitals during COVID. And I couldn't write songs really. Like I just I found it so hard in the face of such enormous tragedy to write anything, anything of sort of that I felt of consequence because, I'm usually writing more from personal experience and writing about kind of personal stories, and I just felt like anything I was experiencing was sort of paling in comparison to what I was seeing every day, and I just couldn't. I think when you're in that sort of like survival mode, it's hard to be creative, basically. And so I think like I had never felt that sort of well filling because I think I'd never let it fill. I think it was just it was the tap that wouldn't turn off. So um, I didn't really give it too much thought, to be honest, because I was busy. I was working. I was still trying to promote the record that I was putting out. So it wasn't until, I guess, like the latter part of 2021, and I thought, I I need to go and see if I can write songs still. And so I there's this beautiful space in Sydney called Phoenix Central Park, and there's a woman named Judith Nielsen who's a sort of philanthropist of the arts in Australia. She owns an art gallery in Sydney, and she'd opened up this space which is kind of almost Guggenheim-esque, like it's, this beautiful, sort of spiraling building, and she just, puts on free shows for patrons. It's a pretty amazing gift to the city, and I had performed there, and so I reached out to them saying, "Would I be able to come in for a week and just do some writing?" They have this beautiful Fazioli piano, grand piano in there, and so I went in and I kind of took all these instruments with me. I'd flown up from Melbourne, and a friend of mine who lives in Sydney loaned me a bunch of amps and guitars and stuff. And I basically barricaded myself in this circle of instruments. And I thought, I'm not leaving until I've produced something. And surely enough, the well was actually overflowing, and I just hadn't realized. And so, in the space of 8 days, I wrote 8 songs.
So it wasn't a deliberate thing to say because again, some songwriters say I'm intentionally I'd love to write, but I'm not going to. It's not that there's nothing there. They deliberately don't so that when it just but it sounds like for you it wasn't a question of it was a question of you couldn't really write, but you needed that space to be able to write.
Yeah, I don't think I am as deliberate about holding off writing in that way. I think I'm kind of waiting for the impulse. And if the impulse isn't there, then I'm not going to try to force it. And every year you get older, well, in my experience, the impulse is less frequent. But when it comes, it's still as strong. And so I have just, learnt to not rush the impulse, not crowd it, just wait for it to come because, it always does in some form as long as I'm engaging with the world around me. And so, yeah, it wasn't as much a deliberate action, more, I mean, in that setting, it was more a response to my life and the very absurd nature of life for everyone at the time. But, going forward, it was more, yeah, it was less a deliberate effort to hold off writing and more just I'm going to listen to to that impulse, and when it's not there, I'm gonna go and do something else.
So do you get anxious if you're not because it sounds like to me you're okay with not creating in some
Yeah,
fashion every day.
I guess I think of creating pretty broadly. So usually when the I guess the impulse, I'm probably more directly relating to lyrics because I feel like I could make music every day. Like I can make some form of music every day. And in order to maintain the kind of constant creativity and not just wait to be creative every 6 months, I push that creativity into different places. Whether it's like I always have a myriad of projects on the go. I'm always making instrumental music. Sometimes I'm making music to pitch for particular films or TV shows. Often I'm just writing in a journal, or yeah, often, it's I think I think of making records either in the filling phase or the outpouring phase. So if I've got nothing to sort of pour out that day, then I'm just trying to absorb, through reading and watching and the other means by which you fill the well.
So when you were in that space in Melbourne, it sounds like it was a beautiful space. I mean, it was a park-like setting, at least outside of where you were. How much do you think that impacts the external environment? I mean, I've interviewed so many songwriters. Some tell me they get inspired by the crowds in the streets and the bustle of New York City. Others love the pastoral element of the country. So, how much do you think that impacts you when it comes to songwriting and inspiration?
Yeah, I think it impacts me a lot. And I think that like the this first place that was the one that was in Sydney, I found and the second week where I sort of did this same process was actually in a church. And the first place was also it's not a church, but it was very, it felt very holy. And it felt very kind of sacred. And I think in more recent times, I've taken myself to places that are more filled with hustle and bustle and energy in order to kind of draw from that, so that when I'm going into the studio, that's the kind of music I'm making. But at this point, I just sort of needed to see what was in my head, because it had been so long, of just, yeah, of not kind of allowing myself, I guess, or not having the space to be creative because of the pandemic. So I think I wanted to kind of be in a place which felt like it needed to be filled with something beautiful. And that was, the surrounds that I was in and the piano I was playing, it was all just so beautiful. And that, you know, that's always what I kind of gravitate towards in music anyway. But it just felt like it was, ready to receive all the emotions that had been kind of absolutely bubbling up in me for 18 months.
I haven't asked a COVID related question in a few
Sorry, I
years.
keep bringing
No,
it up.
no, no, no. It's not that at all. But this is what I want to explore because when I was
Mm,
interviewing people during COVID, that's all we were talking about is that,
of course.
and there was that, at first, I think the response from people who weren't songwriters was, "Oh, this is great. You're locked down. You can write all the songs in the world." But for the most part, it was the exact opposite. There was a struggle to create when surrounding all those things. But what I find interesting was you said that the level of the depths of the emotion made it impossible for you to create or difficult for you to create because of all the things going on around you. Um, so is that normally a difficult place for you to write from? And I've got a bunch of quotes up here on my screen from authors, and it reminds me of Rilke, the poet, said, "Surely all art is the result of one's having been in danger, of having gone through an experience all the way to the end where no one can go any further." That's a pretty famous quote that he has. But I love that idea of having been in danger. But anyway, I'd like to explore that idea that at some
Mm.
level, the depths are so it's impossible to create because you're so deep in it.
Yeah, I think it was for me not not the depth of the emotion exactly because I feel like I'm always writing from the depths. But I think what it was that it was it was other people's grief. And I felt like I didn't deserve
Hmm.
to write about that at the time, even though I had my own grief, which was that I felt like my career had just gone off a cliff, because of like the world shut down, and I, was in music. It's very hard to find momentum, and then when you do, it's a beautiful thing, and then when a pandemic comes, no one has it anymore. And so I felt I had personal grief for just my own situation, but that felt like nothing in comparison to the grief I was sort of seeing in the hospital every day. And what made it more challenging, and I've read lots of accounts of this, from medical people, who experienced it much more than I did, in Melbourne, which was Like we were in lockdown for a long time, but it was, not compared to somewhere like New York City, didn't even come close to that sort of human tragedy and actual loss of life. But what was challenging, and there's a couple of songs about this on the record, that you know because of the um, because of the rules in the hospital at the time, family members weren't allowed to come in and see their loved ones in the hospital. And so, there was one particular instance that was, because you get pretty desensitized, honestly, in the hospital because it's just tragedy after tragedy all the time. But there was this one particular instance which I wrote a lot about on the record, and there was this man who we formed a really lovely, friendship, and he always used to call me Sophia, which is, my name is Sophie, but I let him call me Sophia. And he had brain cancer, and I was in the section of the hospital that was, called rehab at the time, looking after him in his sort of post-operative period. And we did a progress scan on him, and he was supposed to have been, about to go home. And the cancer turned out to be so aggressive that it had grown back everywhere in the space of, 4 weeks, which was pretty unprecedented. And I had to go in and tell him that it would be, there was no other treatment basically. And normally, if you're delivering news like that to a patient, you would ask them to bring their family in, and you would go in and deliver the heartbreaking news, and then you would walk away, and their family would be there to kind of comfort them. But as a medical professional, you had to play all of those roles. And that was just so hard, because, even in that moment, this man was such a lovely man, and he was a very religious person. And I went in and I told him the news, and I was doing my absolute best to deliver it in a, not in an emotional way, because it's not my space to be emotional, it's his. But I found it really hard, and I think he could see that. And, he kind of grabbed my hand and said, "This is what was written for me." And we just had this, really emotional moment together. And then I went and sat in my car and just cried, cried for about an hour. And that, I didn't know how to go home and write about that at the time. Like it just was sort of too difficult to, to take his grief and sort of mesh it with my own. And I just kind of, yeah, it felt, I felt like I hadn't sort of earned that place yet to turn all that into a story that then I would put out into the world. So I think, yeah, it was such exceptional circumstances at the time. But as with everything, with time away from it, I sort of came to understand my own perspective in it, and how I could, how I sort of needed to get it out in the form of a song.
Well, that's related to what I was going to ask you at some point. Was generally, do you need distance to be able to
You
write
know,
about something?
I never used to. And it's funny, my partner is a songwriter as well. And we when we first got together, we would talk a lot about songwriting process. And she was always someone who did need distance from something to write. And that always fascinated me at the time, because I was like, I don't think I can write from distance. Like I need to be, in it. I need to be sort of experiencing the emotions in real time in order to write about it in the best way that I can. But that has really changed, over time. And still, I think I'm sort of a hybrid of the two. But I do find, in my earlier years of songwriting, I never used to I never used to sort of do drafts of anything. It was like brain dump. That was the song. And I think there's a beauty in that. But I do think, you know, as years have gone on, often I will do that first brain dump when I'm in the moment, and then I will sort of go back with a bit of distance and sort of say, am I telling that story, in the most sort of interesting or thoughtful way? So I think I've sort of, yeah, graduated to a bit of a mix of both.
With those songs that are brain dumps, though, that come so quickly, are you less likely to revise those because the thought is, okay, there's a reason why this happened so quickly. I should let it be.
Yes, definitely. I think, and you can always tell there are a few of those songs on every record. Like I remember on my previous record, there was a song called Volcanic, which was like that. I felt like, I mean, there's lots of artists who talk about receiving songs from somewhere, and I don't know if that's what I buy into, but sometimes, goddamn, it feels like that. You just feel like you're just this thing's just pouring out of you, and whether you're receiving it from somewhere or whether it's just suddenly there's this moment where all the kind of the synapses in your body have aligned for a brief moment, and this kind of idea that you've obviously been ruminating on for a long time just crystallizes, and it just kind of comes out in this in this pretty perfect way. But I mean, if I'm making a record, I feel like that might happen on on a couple of songs, but often, often it's a bit more laborious.
What are you revising for? I mean, I'm not a songwriter, I'm a prose writer, but my
Mhm.
thing is like when I'm revising for prose, the first thing I look for are unneeded prepositions. I know that's very specific, but as a prose writer, they just tend to drag sentences down with unneeded words. I know it may not be the case with songwriters, but at least for me, that's something that I deliberately make like this is the thing I'm going to look for. Um, is
I guess
any
for me, yeah, sorry, for me, it's kind of the contrast of plain speaking and sort of imagery. That's usually the thing I'm kind of combing back through my songs for, and I think like I believe, my approach is always a balance of both. Like I like in songwriting where there is this kind of, opaque imagery and you're listening to this song and you're trying to figure out what the writer is saying. And then the last line of the verse is like absolute gut punch. Here is kind of what I'm getting at. And I think that, probably what I'm looking for when I go back through my songs is like, am I am I sort of leaning too much into imagery that this is so unclear what this is about. Sometimes sometimes that's what I want to do purposefully. And I think that there are songwriters that I love who do that in a way, like Justin Vernon springs to mind, where it's like you look at the lyrics of those songs and you're like, this like this kind of makes no real sense, but you still get a sense of what he means, like from the way it's constructed and from the way he is singing it. So I think sometimes, that really works. But sometimes if I'm looking back through songs and I think that's what I've attempted and it's not working. I need to sort of reconstruct it in a way that is really conveying the emotion or, if I look back at a song and there's kind of too much plain speaking and I think like, could I say this in a way that is, that's more loaded with imagery so that someone is sort of trying to like I'm putting more faith in the listener to try to figure out what is being said rather than like, I went down to the shops and I bought a carton of milk and then I came home, and you're sort of just like walking down this garden path. And that's what I think if you sometimes, unless you're getting the divine brain dump, if it is just the initial brain dump that is unedited, I think sometimes that's what I find in my own writing that it might just sort of be too plain and too obvious.
And I like that. I like that there are specifics to that process. I feel like that makes my revision process much more efficient if I know exactly. It sounds like you know exactly what to look for, like me with the prepositions. And I think it makes the process much easier if you say, okay, this is the one thing I'm going to look for. And in this, I'm going to do one pass where that's all I look for.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the other thing it reminds me of is I did this course at the start of this year. There's this great thing called School of Song. And know some people who've actually done the teaching, but this time I enrolled as a student. It's like a 4 week, course, because it was being taught by Brian Eno, who I, have so much admiration for. And I was I could have listened to him just talk for hours on end. But something he brought up, which has been something that had sort of been rolling around my head for a while, he was like, as you get older, your melodies get flatter, and he's like, when you're younger, your melodies on average kind of jump around a lot more, but then you listen to, the late works of Leonard Cohen or a number of artists, and the melodies, that they do start to kind of even out and not jump around so much. So there are things like that where I think, I'm also looking back at my work thinking, have I fallen into these traps, and so um on this record actually, there were some songs. There's a song called Your Consolation Prize, which I had finished that song, in production and everything, and then I rewrote the chorus because it just wasn't. It's probably not a good example of this Eno thing I'm talking about, because I think I took the melody from more wide ranging to flatter. Um, but I think like I'm sort of constantly more and more, and I do think there's like a precipice that you cross, and it's actually no longer very useful. But I do think I've sort of bought more into the editing idea of songwriting in more recent years.
So you're certainly the first medical doctor or songwriter I've interviewed, and I have interviewed very few songwriters who say that they are disciplined writers. But when you come from another career where discipline is necessary, it makes the process of writing much easier. So I guess that's my way of asking: are you, when it comes to the actual act of writing, are you disciplined in the sense of you're able to sit down for long stretches and say, I'm going to write for an hour or two? Generally, I imagine you're a pretty disciplined writer when it comes to the actual act of writing.
Yeah, look, I am probably in an unsurprising turn of events. I am a relatively disciplined person, um, and I do. I mean, I find myself very sort of um, in cycles. So like if I have, for instance, this past month in February, I've been trying to, work on a new record that will come after this one that we're talking about. And so, going into that month, I was like, I'm gonna, treat it as sort of a not so much a 9 to 5, but be very diligent about sort of 5 days a week, really sitting down and trying to flesh these ideas out. Um and I can't sort of sustain that for more than kind of the set amount of time. Like I think the idea of me going into a studio and writing every day 9 to 5 for the entire year, that doesn't appeal to me at all. Like I don't like to think of songwriting like a job. I still, and I think that that is also a hangover of of having a different job, of being in medicine, because I know what it's like to have a job, to have sort of a more conventional job, and so I have such a reverence for music and for songwriting, and I think like I only want to sort of stay with it as long as the inspiration feels like it's there. I do believe sometimes you have to really persist and kind of knock down the wall that's in front of you. But in another sense, I feel like if a wall has emerged in front of you, then I'm more a believer in going around it than through it. And I think that comes through, as I was talking about before, having multiple creative pursuits on the go. Because I do think that if something's just not happening, then it's not meant to be happening. So while I think there's a balance of sort of being disciplined in your work output, but also acknowledging that, if the specific thing you're working on is just not happening, then you jump into another lane and you pick another project, and you put the hours in there. And often what I find is that then leads me back to what I was initially trying to do in the first place.
So the discarded projects that or you discard because they're not happening, you do come back to them? I mean, do you find that you mostly come back to them at some point?
Most of the time, yeah. I mean, there's always songs where you think this is just not happening. This is just not going anywhere. But honestly, I mean, that's probably 5% of the time. I think. I will always try to. I mean, it's so dependent on what part of the process I'm at. You know, like if I'm just sort of writing songs, throwing stuff at the wall, I will try to get, you know, that demo to completion, and then, you know, I can put it away for a long time. But to come back to Brian Eno for a second, one thing that he was sort of talking about in these lectures was the process of archiving, particularly, you know, as a songwriter. And he's the guy he works with has kind of built this, you know, software that is especially archives Brian Eno's work, of which there are thousands and thousands of songs. Um, but he was sort of saying the importance of archiving even the worst ideas you've ever had, and putting it all in sort of a big playlist, and every now and then, you know, going back to listen to it. And because, you know, even though the song itself is static, like it's never going to change from the moment you record it, you change, and the way you listen to it and the way you interpret it is going to change. And, you know, you never know how you're going to sort of look back at something and think, oh, there's actually a really interesting seed of an idea in there that I couldn't see at the time. Um, and that you know, that I've come to realize now.
Okay, on a very practical level, I believe I read in your bio, I think I heard I saw a reference to pen or pencil and paper, and I'm hoping that's literal, not metaphorical. So, are you when it comes to lyrics, are you a pen and paper person or a computer person?
I am ultimately a pen and paper person, so I always have, you know, have many songwriting books, and I always have 2 books on the go. One is my, like, books for songwriting, and the other is, you know, a book for ideas and other thoughts. And but I also am a person sort of living in 2025 who doesn't carry a handbag with me. So if I am out about in the world and, you know, something strikes me, some words or something, I do have an extremely long note in my phone, with just, you know, words and you know, starters of phrases and things like that. But if I'm ever turning that into something, then it is with pen and paper.
Okay, many follow-ups. First of all, you have 2 books. I don't hear 2 books, I hear 1 book typically, and that has everything, but you have a book for lyrics and a book for thoughts. So, how did that happen? I feel like it's much more efficient to have 1.
Look, I think, like, I like it to be I like the songs to be uninterrupted, you know, like, I want them to just like, and if I'm searching back, it's kind of, well, I can't say it's for efficiency because 'cause you're right, that doesn't seem very efficient. But if I'm going back to sort of look at lyrics or chords, I don't wanna filter through a bunch of other inane crap that I just wanted to kind of write at the time. You know, the songwriting pages, they feel, yeah, they feel sort of like, um, that they feel more like, I don't know, I would, like the other book, no one's ever gonna see that. You know, like that has like, it's not a diary, but it's almost like a bit diary-esque. And often if I'm writing a song in the other book and I hit a snag, or I'm like, I just cannot get this chorus, then I'll go to the other book and I will just write 2 pages of stuff. Like I will just write everything that I'm thinking about. Like I will do the brain dump there, and then I will kind of look through that and see if there's anything that I can take back to the other book to finish the song. It's a process that makes sense to me.
Totally, I love it. See, I love those answers because I've never heard about that before, and I love how those are you have a very particular way of doing things, and that's the ritual, and it works for you, and there's a justification for it. Now, to get even deeper, I love my blue pen, and
Mm,
songwriters are very particular about types of pens and even color of ink. So you're looking around for something. So I can tell you feel strongly about this.
I do. I think my backpack's in the other room, but it has to be black ink.
Why?
And because blue just, it doesn't feel final to me. It doesn't, like, it feels like I used to use blue. Maybe I'm triggered. I used to use blue in university, which was, not a great time. So I like to use black. I think black to me is more classy. No offense to the people who use blue. And I like it to have a click like I like it to click on and off. It can't be a felt pen because it's like it just runs and smudges in those books, and it also bleeds through to the other side of the page, which I would like to use.
Now, I had Jerry Harrison of the Talking Heads on last year, and he said he loves felt tip because he loves the sensation of the scraping. Uh, isn't that cool? I love that response, like the
Yeah.
scraping. And he's a visual artist also, so that's where it comes
Mm,
from. But I never
that's
heard that
cool.
before. Okay, now to get even further into this, when you're crossing things out, complete cross out or just one line because in case you need that thing later on.
It depends on the idea. If I think it might have merit later, then it will be a thin line. But if it's like if I suddenly get hit by a bus and someone stumbles across this book, I do not want them to know that this idea came out of my head. So I will scratch it out.
I love those answers, and I interview songwriters who insist on pencil, not pen, and then there's the question of do you erase or do you
Wow, I would
draw a
never
line?
erase. Yeah, that feels to me like I just yeah, I don't like the symbolism of that. But
Exactly.
the crossing out till you can't read it for some reason doesn't bother me as much.
And do you have a certain type of notebook? You must have a certain type of notebook that you like.
I like to I mean the book one I was describing where I just write whatever is one of the decomposition books always. Like that's my kind of rubbish writing book. The songwriting book, book two, I actually like it to be a totally different book every time. I like it to look totally different, be a different color, be a different brand. So I actually just bought my next book like for because I'm about to finish a book the other day from this cute little Japanese store in Melbourne. And it's got like a sort of red line on the left hand side and then it's cream. But the previous one was bright yellow. My first ever songbook was green, and my second one was like a brown color. So yeah, I like it to be different every time.
I love it. I like it. I love hearing responses I've never heard before. Now to the voice memos or the memos on the phone, I mean, I hear that all the time to songwriters, and they typically have thousands of memos, whether they're voice or and my thought is there any organization to those whatsoever? Do you label them in any sense, or did you just frantically go through them and look for that thing from a month ago?
Yeah, they're just like I mean, I've got it up in front of me now. They're just written. They're just lines I've written down from somewhere, whether it's reading or whether it's like hearing in a podcast or just something 2 words that I see somewhere that I really like, and I just write them down chronologically to where I've heard them. So there's some, and when I use the words, I put them in italics in the note. But there are some like, there are phrases that have been there, like, been right up the top for years that I'm like, "Should I just get rid of them? Because like, clearly I'm never gonna use them because I haven't so far, but I can't bring myself to." So, it's just kind of, an ever-expanding note, and more often than not, I'm using the most recently added things, and the words that are further up will probably forever remain there in non-italics.
I mean, I haven't taught in a while on the university level, and yet I still have all of my notes that I had as a professor. Why am I keeping them? I mean, there's no, there's clearly this. I'm not going to teach those things again, but I still have my computer.
Yeah. We
I don't
gotta
know what
fill the
that's
cloud with something, you know?
exactly. So a couple more questions, and I this is a quote I always give songwriters. And Agatha Christie said, "The best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes," and so that's the discussion around the number of times we get ideas when our brains are engaged in monotonous activities. So things like gardening, vacuuming, folding laundry, that there's a lot of research behind, it's that eureka moment. They happen when our brains are engaged in an unconscious activity, driving or anything like that. And that's when the creative ideas come up. So, how often do you find that when you're really engaged in activities that require no thought, when the creativity kind of bubbles to the front?
The shower. That is number 1 most fruitful place for me. I feel like I've come up with all my best ideas in the shower. And but I totally buy into that, and to the point where I often like I do a lot of songwriting sessions for other artists as well, and some for myself. And if we ever if we ever hit a snag with trying to, move forward with lyrics, I will go to the bathroom, and I reckon 9 times out of 10, I will come back with the lyric, which I know seems crazy, but I feel like it's like you go, you change space, you wash your hands, you come back out and you're like, "Oh, here's the idea that we've been trying to get to for 45 minutes." So I'm a firm believer in going to do something else for just 2 minutes, and coming back with kind of a fresh perspective. But I love to cook. That's sort of, other than music, that's the thing that makes me most relaxed and, makes me feel really engaged in something, but it's nice to do because it's not about music. But I often will find, that as I'm, chopping vegetables, that ideas and lyrics and things will come. So I'm a big believer in that.
Okay, two things. One, I interviewed Lauren Mayberry from Churches a couple of years ago, and she actually said chopping vegetables. She actually said that is a place where she's incredibly creative. So that's number two. You and
Awesome.
Lauren, yeah, literally chopping vegetables, which I thought was hilarious. That's the first time I've heard it since then. Um,
Hmm.
so there was an article in the Washington Post a couple of years ago exactly about why we get our best ideas in the shower. And
Oh.
it's that repetition, right? It's that repetition
Mm.
when you're doing things that you don't have to think about, that's when the ideas come to you. But along the cooking angle, though, I hear some people say that uh, that's deliberately the place where they take a break from the songwriting. No ideas come to them deliberately because I need a break from that. So I hear that thing too.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely not actively trying to, to write when I'm cooking because I agree. I think like, my partner often laughs because she hates cooking. But like, if I've had a really stressful day for whatever reason, whether I've been in the studio working on something that's not coming or whether I've been in the hospital, I like to come home and cook, which she's like, that's mystifying because that would just make me even more stressed. But I'm like, no, it actually makes me intensely relaxed. But whenever I'm cooking, I always listen to instrumental music. So maybe that's also sort of why lyrics will, sometimes pop into my head while I'm just sort of, I have, the latest Phil Cook record on in the background or something.
I'm also just thinking you have to have incredibly good eye-hand coordination to be able to chop vegetables and also think about songwriting. I mean, no joke, right? I mean, most people couldn't because you're thinking about not cutting your fingers off. But I realize that that's a tremendous gift you have that that's so monotonous for you that you're able to think about songs as you're potentially lopping a finger off.
Hopefully not. Hopefully, I won't be one of the many people I've seen in the emergency department cooking.
Sure, right. Okay, last question. So I do find that songwriters, for the most part, are pretty voracious readers, whether they get inspired by literature. Some do, some don't. But I'd love to explore that idea. How often, I know you're super, super, super busy, but how often do you get to read? And if you who inspires you? Who do you like?
Yeah, so I've actually read some. I also kind of move in cycles with this, but I've tried to be a lot more intentional about my reading. In the past sort of 6 months, and I feel like it is so true. The kind of the more you read, the more you read. And so my favorite books that I've read recently James by Percival Everett.
Mm.
I did really love that book. I know that was so huge last year. And At the moment, I'm reading Maggie Nelson's Like Love, which I love Maggie Nelson's writing. Like she's just, she's really kind of a modern day philosopher. I loved her book, The Argonauts, when I first read that. And this current book, Like Love, is a lot of essays about different things she's reviewed or art she's seen or books she's read or conversations she's had. There's just a conversation she had with Björk, which was incredibly interesting. Um, The other thing I read in January, which this is gonna, I mean, it's kind of, I was gonna say it's a bit wanky to say, but it's like I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which I'm not like, I'm not someone who's like constantly reading like that sort of vintage of writer, but it kept kind of popping up in things I was watching, and like I just kept hearing people talk about it, and I was like, I should try and read this. And the first few pages, I was like, man, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this book because it's pretty, it's sort of pretty dry and written a long time ago. And the more I read it, the more I thought, you know, I honestly felt like maybe this is how people felt when they like first read the Bible or something. Like it's so groundbreaking and so incredible and feels honestly kind of like a sacred text. And it really, like, I found it so moving to read. And I've kind of kept it by my bedside because, and I went through. I'm sure some people will shudder when they hear this, but I went through and underlined things in pen in the book because it was just I felt like I should carry it with me everywhere I go because it has so many incredible sort of lessons to live by. And it was a book I really needed to read when I did read it. Um, yeah, all of that is to say that am really kind of consuming books more than I have in a long time at the moment, and I always find that when I'm in a patch of reading lots, I am always writing more.
Absolutely. I mean, I that makes sense. But I guess my one follow-up to that is I wish I could. I was always the kind of person who had to finish books. Like once I started it, I don't care how much I didn't like it. And I realized how much time I was wasting, and there was so much other literature. And it was incredibly liberating to finally say, you know what, screw it. If I don't like it, I'm not gonna finish it. And that just happened to me like a week ago. It's like, I can't finish this. Why am I doing this? So are you the kind of person that says, I'm seeing this through no matter how bad it is, or are you willing to stop and just say, I'm done?
I think I'm hoping to get to your level of enlightenment, but at the moment I do persist with terrible
It's
books
not easy, let me tell you.
because
It took me years.
because yeah, I don't know, I really can't. And often that it's been so to my detriment in past years because some like there'll be a book that writes off my whole year of reading, because then I'm stuck with it for months and I'm keep looking at it. I'm like, oh, I don't want to pick this up, so then I don't pick anything up. So, I think I am. I think I'm edging towards that.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. You can find all of the old episodes on all major streaming platforms and probably some minor ones as well. You can also find them on the Songwriters on Process website. I started the site back in 2011, so that means there are hundreds upon hundreds of interviews with some of the world's best songwriters. So take a deep dive into some of those episodes. They are all great. Of course, I'm biased. Also, shameless plug. My book, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, is out now on Hachette Books and in all major bookstores. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is the guitarist in the metal band Lamb of God. And so we collaborated on his memoir. I'm biased, but that's a damn good book. Again, it is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir. And lastly, if you want to get in touch, go to the Songwriters on Process website. You can fill out a handy contact form and it'll get to me that way. You can also email me at ben@songwritersonprocess.com. I'm all ears. Send me your comments, your suggestions, your complaints, people you want me to interview. I get great suggestions all the time. I can't respond to all of the emails because I get a lot of them, but I do read all of them. And let me know your thoughts. If you have ideas for people you want me to interview, there's your chance. And with that, I am out. See you next time.